Well, here we are again, recording our daily video, walking through the life of Jesus, his last week on earth. I hope you've been enjoying these as we think about Jesus and what he was doing this week leading up to his death, and then eventually, of course, his resurrection. So today, today is Thursday, sometimes called Maundy Tuesday, which has to do with his, or Maundy Thursday, which has to do with his command that he gives his disciples. But at any rate, today, Jesus is spending a lot of time with his friends, spending a lot of time with the disciples during his last night before his upcoming death. So tonight, he has the Last Supper and upper room discourse that he has with his disciples, and then his time in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he eventually will be arrested. So today, Jesus is instituting the Lord's Supper and spending time with his closest friends while he is here with his last moments on earth. He's very aware, of course, that his death is upcoming and is preparing for it with his friends and in prayer. So let's kind of talk about both things separately. We'll first kind of touch on the Lord's Supper, the Last Supper, and then we'll talk about the Garden of Gethsemane. So in the Last Supper, what's going on? Well, first off, when Jesus and the disciples arrive to the room that's been prepared, that Jesus will spend some time washing the feet of his disciples. John is the only apostle who records this episode, but he washes the feet of the disciples. Why? Well, he's trying to teach them a lesson about service. He's trying to remind them that he is the one who served, that he's here to serve as their, even though he is king, he is here to serve them. In particular, later on, he's going to serve them all the way to the point of death, death on a cross. So the message of the washing of the feet of the disciples is all about the service and the service of Christ in particular. The other thing is that he has a conversation with the disciples as well and promises them the Holy Spirit. See, during this time, there's the upper room discourse where Jesus explains what he is, what's he's about to do, and then what is going to happen once he's gone. And he promises them, look, when I leave, when I'm leaving you guys, eventually you're going to receive the Holy Spirit. So Jesus promises this Holy Spirit is going to come and dwell in them, remind them of all the things that Jesus said. In fact, he says in the book of John that it's going to be better for him to leave so that the Holy Spirit will arrive, which for his disciples would have been quite a stunning statement for him to say that Jesus, what are you talking about? That the Holy Spirit is, better than you in the flesh. But yes, that's what Jesus exactly tells the disciples. And you, again, go to the book of John, John 14 through 16 is that what's called the upper room discourse, the conversation Jesus has with his disciples before his death. So he also institutes the Lord's Supper during this time as well, where he takes the bread and the wine and he gives them to the disciples, initiating the new covenant. Now, there's a lot of rich symbolism going on here in the Lord's Supper that would be impossible to give it the proper treatment just in a short few sentences. But let me just touch on a couple. Number one, he's kind of reminding them of the Passover meal. At the Passover meal, the lamb was sacrificed. The lamb's blood was important because it was the thing that covered over sin. So you have the lamb's blood covering over sin of the Israelites. And then you also have the unleavened bread, reminding them of the purity during this time. So Jesus is giving it a new meaning. And he tells them that he's doing this to initiate the new covenant. You can find that in the book of Jeremiah 31 and chapters 31 and 33. And in that new covenant, God promises that he's going to initiate a new covenant where people are no longer going to have to run around trying to obey God on their own, but rather he's going to dwell in them, and that he's going to give them the ability to obey his rules and his laws because he is now living within them. And God's going to be the one who does this. It's going to be based entirely upon God, not upon the greatness of humanity. So Jesus institutes this Lord's Supper. He gives new meaning to the bread and wine. The bread, of course, becomes Jesus' body. The wine represents his blood. And of course, there's so much more we could say about the Lord's Supper. But so Jesus has this final meal with his disciples before Friday and all the craziness that's going to happen tomorrow. But for now, Jesus is having this kind of quiet, intimate moment with his closest friends and followers, just preparing for his death. So, following the Last Supper, what happens? Well, they get up and leave the room, and they go to the Garden of Gethsemane. Garden of Gethsemane was nearby, and Jesus is going there to spend some extended time in prayer. He goes there and he's going to pray to the Father, trying to get himself prepared spiritually, emotionally, for what he's about to undergo tomorrow on Good Friday. So he takes his closest friends with him. He takes Peter, James, and John. He asks them to pray with him, to pray for him while they're there spending time in that garden. So Jesus goes up and he prays to the Father. He's praying about the cup. The cup was a image that was used throughout the Old Testament, which represents the wrath of God towards sin. And Jesus prays that, if possible, that God would remove this cup, that cup of God's wrath, from him, so that he would not have to undergo it. But ultimately, he surrenders himself to undergo his Father's will and not his own. And so Jesus there is knowing the full extent of the punishment that he's about to undergo, none of it deserved of his account, entirely our account. And he realizes what he's about to undergo. And Jesus is praying to the Father and submitting to his will, which is for him to go to the cross. So Jesus is spending time in prayer. Remarkably, while Jesus is having this intense moment in prayer with the Father, his closest friends and followers, Peter, James, and John, who are with him, are supposed to be praying for him, but he keeps finding them asleep. It's getting late in the night. They're getting tired, and they keep falling asleep. Jesus keeps reminding them, "Hey, guys, come on, because you watch and pray with me, so that you do not enter into temptation." So, of course, they don't. Being the disciples, they keep falling asleep, just can't seem to help themselves, and keep falling asleep while they're supposed to be watching and praying so that they don't enter into temptation. This moment was so intense that we are told that Jesus sweated drops of blood. So this is what is happening in the life of Jesus on Thursday before Good Friday. So what does this all mean for us? What are some applications we can take away? Well, number one, Jesus is initiating a new relationship with God. By that I mean, Jesus is initiating this new covenant. Covenant is a word that is used throughout the Bible, which talks about the relationship between God and his people. And the relationship between God and his people all comes down to covenant. And in this case, Jesus is saying, what I'm about to do is going to initiate this new covenant, this covenant that was prophesied about back in Jeremiah and elsewhere. I am initiating this new covenant where God is going to be with and in you. Now that is fully realized, of course, with the Holy Spirit. When the Holy Spirit comes and dwells within us, it helps us to live the way that we are supposed to live as God's people. One of the other things has to do with the prayers of Jesus. One of the interesting things is that if Jesus needed to pray when he was about to undergo spiritual trial, and he's God, how much more do we? Jesus spends an extended time in prayer with God in order to prepare himself for what he's about to undergo. And the last thing is that Jesus spent time with those closest to him before his struggle. We're social beings. God created us to be in relationships, not just with him, but also with each other. Uh, Having close and good friends to go through trials and struggles with is important for all of us. So including other people in when we are about to undergo a trial or some type of struggle, I think is important to keep in mind. If Jesus needed close friends, so of course do we. Jesus, being of course the perfect human being, had his friends nearby while he's about to undergo a struggle, asking them to support him. And of course, we need to do the same. We need not be afraid to include others in friendship and to draw them into our struggles and temptations. So today Jesus is setting the stage with the Lord's Supper, promising the Holy Spirit, reminding us that what he's about to undergo is for us, is to serve us ultimately and to bring us into relationship with God. Jesus also prays. He spends time in the Garden of Gethsemane in intense spiritual agony at times, trying wrestling with what his trial he's about to undergo. So Jesus prays intensely. And lastly, all of this is taking place with his friends and his closest followers. And I think this is a good reminder for all of us that God made us for friends, that we too need to surround ourselves with those that are going to help us in our walk with God. So I hope that this video is encouraging you as we continue to follow Jesus this week and see how this last week of Jesus pans out before his death and eventual resurrection.